Hi, welcome to today's Seeking Light and Truth show. Had a moment of panic there for a second because my slide presentation didn't come up, but I managed to get it uploaded. So we're going to be able to talk about the topic of eliminating love busters in relationships. Now, this goes back to I've started in this series getting into the idea of male-female relationships, and I've covered the idea that I've struggled with this in my life, and so I had to go search out principles and things that would help me to have better relationships. And I talked about the idea of emotional bank accounts in the previous session, which if you haven't watched, I encourage you to watch that. Which is, and I talked about how you make deposits to other people's emotional bank accounts in order to foster good feelings. And the idea that when people have more deposits with you than they have withdrawals, you like to be around them because they help you feel good about yourself and you feel good about yourself with them. Now, when people make more withdrawals than they make deposits, you get to the point where you don't care anymore. You can still have a kind of a universal love for someone, meaning you care about them as a person, but you no longer enjoy their company when people start making more withdrawals than they make deposits. So that kind of relationship where you enjoy being together, where you have a mutually beneficial win-win relationship, does not happen because of unconditional love. It happens because of a deliberate effort to maximize love-generating activities and minimize love-busting activities. So in addition to trying to create the positive experiences, you want to avoid these habits that are basically destroying feelings of romantic love. Now, these love busters are not just for relationships between a man and a woman. These things bust relationships everywhere. They bust relationships with your children. They bust relationships with your friends. They bust relationships with coworkers or employees or customers or anyone, because these behaviors make withdrawals from other people's emotional bank accounts. And what's important to understand is, just like in the concept of the win, of something that makes a deposit, the person who defines the love buster is the person who receives the love buster, not the person who does the love busting behavior. Because we may think, okay, I'm not doing anything that's making a withdrawal from the other person's emotional bank account. But we have to be aware and listen to the idea that they're communicating to us that our behavior is making a withdrawal from that emotional bank account. And so, communication is very important to make these things happen. Now, the most serious form of love busters are basically abuse. And abuse is the thing that makes the most serious withdrawals from emotional bank accounts. And abuse we're going to define as a deliberate attempt to hurt someone and make them unhappy. So in our closest relationships, why do we have so much struggle with family close relationships? And the reason is because the people closest to us are also the people that we not only that we actually understand the best, and we absolutely know inside the things that we can do that will hurt them the most. And so it becomes very easy to make very serious withdrawals from the emotional bank accounts of people that we're close to, because as we learn about their vulnerabilities, as we learn about the things going on with us, we can, when we're angry, we can target and say the things that are going to be the absolute meanest things we could say to that person. And And we generally justify that behavior because we feel hurt. And we all crave empathy. So one of the things you have to understand is that when you feel hurt, the reason that you are tempted to go and inflict this pain on the other person is because it's a misguided effort, as the guy who created the concept of nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg, says it's a misguided attempt to gain empathy. All right? Because they hurt us. We want them to understand how much we're hurting, so we want to hurt them back so that then they will feel the pain that we're feeling. That's the basic thing for revenge. And we all have to really, really, really get in touch with ourselves and recognize our own potential to seek revenge and seek to hurt other people. One of the books I read on marriage, guy said, we claim that, marital problems are a result of not good communication. He says, actually, that communication is really good in marriage because we're communicating with our action and everything, and we're just not aware of our own intentions of seeking to gain empathy by causing pain to the other person, which is not a way to gain empathy. All it does is escalate conflict. So wherever I see two people in a relationship in conflict, it's always that they're both hurting, they're both in pain, and they're both in a misguided effort to try to get the other person to understand how much they're hurting. They are escalating the hurt, which is escalating the problem and escalating the difficulties between them. Very, very important to understand. So the abusive love busters are selfish demands, disrespectful judgments, and angry outbursts. Now, William F. Hartley says that these are escalating love busters. We start off with selfish demands, then we move to disrespectful judgment, and finally to angry outbursts. Now, some people maybe are already so angry and hurt that they go straight to angry outbursts, but basically they're all very interconnected, and they're all basically abusive behaviors. Now, what selfish demands is a selfish demand is basically ordering someone to do something that benefits you but will make them unhappy. In other words, it's a self-centered behavior where I want something out of you and I don't care if it makes you unhappy. I want you to give it to me anyway. And in a demand, a demand is not a request. And I want to make very clear the difference between a demand and a request. When you make a request, you're automatically assuming that the other person has the right to say no. Okay? When you're making a demand, there is an implied threat that you don't give me what I want, there will be some repercussion or retaliation in exchange for that. And so a selfish demand is the dictator inside of us that wants to be in control and wants to be in control so that we win and we don't care if the other person wins or not. And again, it takes a lot of introspection to understand that this is inside of all of us, that all of us have this capacity. No matter how nice we think we are, we all have this capacity to do this. And it's something that we have to learn to really look at inside of ourselves and figure out how we can start to move past that. And of course, this relates to the idea of win-win. That is, that what we want in relationships, the only game that works in relationships, and we're going to talk about this in a couple of weeks in more detail with the webinar I've put on this enchantment of opposites philosophy, is that in a relationship, whether it's between you and a child or you and your spouse or you and a friend or whatever kind of relationship we're talking about, the only thing that sustains relationships is win-win. That is, that we create something that makes us both feel good, that makes us both happy, that we both, enthusiastically agree to. And anytime there is win-lose or lose-win, it's going to create problems in the relationship. So this is the difference between demanding and asking. It's a very, very clear. You've got to, when you're looking at yourself, and I want you to make sure that you understand that the way to do this is not to use this as a tool to judge and analyze your partner, but a way to look at yourself and assess, what am I doing? Am I demanding or am I asking? If we start off feeling that I'm entitled to something, that is that because this person is my spouse, or because they're my child, or because they're my friend, or because of whatever relationship thing that I assume, that I am assuming that means that as part of that relationship, I'm supposed to get this. Supposed to. That's the thing. That therefore the other person is obligated to do this for me. So right at that very outset, I am basically asserting that they have no right to say no because they're supposed to be doing this. They should do this. Whereas in asking, I'm accepting the vulnerability that the other person may not want to do what I say, and that's okay. I'm asking. I'm not demanding. It's not an expectation. It's a request. Big difference. When I demand, I tend to punish others by attacking them in some way when they fail to do my requests. I may then resort next to name calling, which is the belittling behavior. I may even get into the angry, threatening behavior. So in other words, I'll escalate the battle into the other abusive behaviors in order to try to force the other person to agree. Whereas if I'm asking, there's not going to be any retaliation. I understand that the person has a right to say no and do so without fear of me retaliating or punishing them. And the third aspect of this is really important, is feeling the other person should do what I want, even if it involves making a sacrifice on their part, in which there is no benefit for them. In other words, I win, they lose. Now, one of the reasons why we do this is because we accept the win-lose philosophy. So, for example, if I'm the person who's kind of the people-pleasing enabler in the relationship, then I'm constantly losing so the other person can win. In other words, I'm not negotiating for win-win. I'm playing a game of they win, I lose. And then at a certain point, I figure I've let them win enough times now. It's their turn to lose so I can win. And that is a very, very destructive game, okay? Because it goes both ways. You shouldn't agree to do something that's a lose for you and a win for your partner. Because if you do that, it's ultimately going to go to lose-lose. There's a part of this where you have to recognize that you're entitled to a certain amount of selfishness on your part. But real selfishness isn't saying no to someone else's unreasonable request or that's putting too much demand or pressure on you. It is expecting the other person to lose so you can win. That's selfishness. It's not selfish to say no when something is imposing on you for the benefit of the other person. That's number one. That's not a selfish behavior, because you're just taking care of yourself. You're not making a demand on the other person. You're just, implying your right. You're respecting your right to say no. That was a very difficult concept for me to grasp, because I tended to go for the I lose so you can win, which ultimately builds up a whole bunch of resentment, because the other person then withdraws and withdraws and withdraws until you don't want to be around them anymore. Okay? So asking implies being willing to understand the other person's needs and help them understand how their request will benefit them. In essence, that is the fundamental nature of free association. on whatever level that you want to make it. So let's talk about, just real quickly, the idea of free market economy. Okay, economy where people are free to interact with each other in relationships. In a free market economy, when I have a product or service to offer, I don't go out there and say, oh, here's how you're buying my product or service is going to benefit me. Because everybody's going to look at you, well, what do I care about you? There's an inherent selfishness in all of us, right? We want something good for ourselves. We want a good deal. So my job in selling you something and marketing something to you and offering you a product or service is to convince you why it's in your best interests to buy my product or service. And someone who's, created something that people and able to communicate, this is really valuable to you, will make a lot of money. They'll make a lot of money because the consumer, the person who is buying the products, is perceiving that this is a good deal for them, that they're getting something valuable that they're giving up their money for. Well, what I want you to understand is that basic premise is the same thing that you want to do when you're trying to ask or persuade your spouse to do something for you. It is your responsibility to explain why it is in their best interests to cooperate with you. Okay? That's what asking is. So the four possible exchanges in human relationships are, I lose and you lose, okay? Which is what war is all about. War is always a lose-lose. Even the people who finally win have lost tremendously. Okay, or you lose, I win. You win, I lose. So those are the win, lose, lose, win game that a lot of people play. And the whole idea of like sometimes compromising or whatever is tied up in maybe both of us losing a little bit and both of us winning a little bit, but it doesn't actually create a genuine win-win. A genuine win-win is where we both are happy with what's going on. And that is what we're aiming for in all relationships, okay? We should aim for that with our children, aim for that in our spouses, aim for that with our friends, aim for that with customers, employees, coworkers, whatever. Because win-win is the only winning game. And this actually shows the relationships a little bit better. The win-lose and lose-win are unstable because they always deteriorate eventually into lose-lose. If you're in a relationship and one of you is always winning and the other one is always losing, eventually the person who's losing is going to either break down and die, and the other person is going to lose what they're getting from them, or they're going to get mad and start fighting back, or something is going to happen, and eventually the relationship will break down into a lose-lose. And it's important to understand that compromise is not the same as win-win, because compromise, as I've mentioned, is a partial win and a partial loss for both parties. Now, while compromise is necessary at times, you really want to avoid compromise and instead shoot for the what Stephen R. Covey calls the third alternative, which is looking for something that is different than either one of us are initially negotiating for, but actually satisfies what both of us want to the point that we are both getting a good exchange. As I mentioned, a lot of this is about introspecting. You have to start being aware of your hidden expectations. All of us, based on what we've been taught and what we've grown up with, have certain ideas of what a relationship should be. And so we have these expectations, and we go into relationships with these expectations. And we create these opinions about how people should behave. And then we judge them as bad if they don't behave according to our expectations. In other words, I really like what Anthony DeMello says in one of his books. He says that we start off with an illusion of, oh, this is the perfect person for me, and blah, 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 blah. And we put on these rose-colored glasses, and what we're doing is we're not seeing the person through through in reality, we're not really seeing the human being in front of us, or even our own human being. We're seeing a potential expectation of the fulfillment of our needs. And so we're imagining or seeing them through this rose-colored lens of, oh, I'm finally going to have this wonderful relation, that this person's going to love me, they're going to do this for me, they're going to do that for me, they're going to blah, blah. Then we find out the other person is just as human as we are. They have just as many faults and shortcomings as we do. And then he says we replace the one illusion with another one. And that illusion is now that they're a bad person. When in reality, they were never the wonderful dream person that we thought, and they're not the bad person we think. Both of those are illusions. We're not seeing people clearly. We're seeing them through our expectations of what we think people should be and do. In other words, it's a relationship based on judgment. And at a certain point, I'll get into that a little bit later on too. The truth is that real love only exists in freedom. Liberty is necessary for love. The more liberty people have, the more there's capability of creating love between them, because love is something that binds people through mutual benefit. Listening to my wife describe the Ukrainian society under communist rule, and basically even that's continuing to this day in the general thing of Ukraine, shows me that a fundamental principle I've believed for a long time: the more force you imply, the more laws, rules, regulations, everything you do that is forcing people, the less love there is in society. The more closed, self-centered, egocentric, self-protective people become. Because basically, Ukraine and under communist rule, everything functions by bribes. Nobody, she says, you walk into a store and you say, do you have any dresses? And they go, she says, the shopkeeper actually says things like, don't you have eyes? I'm busy, blah, 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 get away. Nobody, because in other words, there's no reason for anybody to win. Everybody's, under the pressure of force. And when you create that in your family, the same thing happens. Because what you're doing is you're building your relationship based on rewards and punishments, which are efforts to manipulate other people into doing what you want. So you're playing the role of dictator. And when you're seeking control, you're not seeking love. You're seeking power. So if you want to create love, you give up the search for power and instead search for love, which is based in harmony. Asking is difficult because when people that we love say no, we can feel hurt, which makes demanding seem like the solution. So then if we can judge the other person and we decide, well, I'm entitled to this, it's owed to me, then I don't have to feel vulnerable asking for it. But the one thing you can't demand is that someone love you. You can't demand it. You cannot compel someone to love you. They either choose to love you or they choose not to love you. You have no control over it. So that's why love is such a vulnerable thing. But love comes naturally with understanding. When we see people clearly, as Anthony DeMello also pointed out, and I really came to understand this, when we see people clearly, we feel love for them. When they see us clearly, they feel love for us. So getting to where we actually have the ability to be vulnerable with each other, then that is where we start to feel love, is because we see our mutual humanness and we see that we're in this together, and we can help each other rather than seek for power. Now, you replace the love buster of selfish demands with the love builder of thoughtful requests. And a thoughtful request is you explain what you want and ask how the other person would feel about doing it. Could you do this for me? You know, and if they have a problem with it, you withdraw the request as it was previously printed and ask the other person if there are other ways they could help you and feel good about it. So the basic rule is, okay, like if I say, you know, honey, if you spent more time with me, we had conversation, I would, you know, it would help me feel better, and I would be able to give you more of what you want. So one of the things I really do in a relationship is I look and I try to figure out, what does the other person want? What does the other person need? And then based on that, I try to go, okay, you know, if you were able to do this for me, I would be able to do more of that for you. And then I in other words, the idea of creating win-win and putting out proposals or ideas on the table, but never trying to force them on the other person, but kind of trying to create this environment of requests. And in that, as I've started to do that, one of the things I had to learn to do was to say no and stand up for myself when someone is making selfish demands of me and saying, wait a minute, okay, I'm happy to do things for you, but I don't, but you know, I can't do that right now. I don't feel like doing that right now. And so I make it a rule that I never do something for someone unless I can do it in love. And if I can't do it in love, I say no. Now, disrespectful judgments generally arise because we decide we're going to impose our beliefs or behavior on other people. And we do this through criticizing them, lecturing them, ridiculing them, belittling them, or possibly even threatening them. And so we play the role of the critic, not the dictator, but the critic. And one of these things is name calling. I detest name calling. I'm trying to teach my family here to stop calling each other names. The hard part is that they speak Russian with each other, and I don't always know when they're calling each other names. Now, when my own family earlier that had kids, if one of my kids called the other one's name, I would say, that's not true. We don't call each other names. Like someone says, you're stupid, I say, there's nobody stupid in this family. Okay? But it's really false to say that sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Now, it's true that we have to build up a little bit of internal toughness because we're going to be criticized all through our life. But the fact of the matter is that when we engage in name calling, we entrench other people more deeply into defending themselves. And so if they have any self-esteem, we actually are building walls between us rather than breaking down walls and creating closeness and intimacy. We're forcing the other person to put up walls to defend themselves. And if they don't, then they're going to feel bad about themselves. And if they feel bad about themselves, then they won't want to be around us. So one of the things that just blows me away online with what a lot of people do is you'll see people, you know, I mean, maybe I posted something like I posted something about the Bears Ears National Monument. And what this was is that at the very end of the Obama administration, he designated this huge tract of land in Utah as a national monument over the objection of almost all the government leaders in Utah, and over the objection of almost everybody who lived in that area, including all of the Native American tribes who lived in that area, who were now cut off from lands that they had used for hunting or fishing or wildcrafting herbs and blah, blah, blah. And so Trump came in and basically reversed that and negotiated with the people in Utah and downsized that. So, you know, I had, people who were like, oh, Trump, blah, 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 blah. And I said, wait a minute, this is what the local people wanted. And, you get it. And I said, look, I've got these videos of local Native Americans practically in tears over this, talking about how that they've been abused and unjustly treated and everything, and how this really isn't protecting the environment, and how this is destroying the local blah, 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 blah. Anyway. And what happens is when you're trying to reason with people in today's society, a lot of times when they can't counteract your arguments, or they get frustrated with the points you're raising, they resort to name calling. You're stupid. You don't care about the environment. You're a blah, 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 blah. And this is the whole, political landscape now. You're a racist. You're a Islamophobic. You're homophobic. You're blah, blah. Name calling, name calling, name calling, name calling, name calling. And what is stupid about this is that the surest way to entrench the other person in their belief systems is to call them names. Because when you call them names, they defend themselves. And so you create this incredible, instead of building bridges and creating understanding and trying to move past this, we just create more and more walls in society. And this happens in interpersonal relationships a lot. Teasing and ridicule, a lot of people say, why, it's just teasing. But reality, a lot of people disguise their belittling remarks as humor. But if your humor is making the other person feel hurt or defensive, it wasn't humor. If it made them angry and didn't make them laugh, how can you say it was humor? Humor is designed to entertain, make the other person laugh. If it made them angry, it wasn't funny. All right? So when you make your child or your spouse or a friend the brunt of your jokes, you will destroy the good feelings with you, and again cause walls to go up and destroy their emotional bank account. So you replace disrespectful judgments with persuasion, and persuasion is you try to help the other person understand what you understand and feel what you feel. And when a person understands why you want something and empathizes with you on a feeling level, they'll generally respond to what you ask. Now that's a tricky skill to learn. All right, it's something you have to practice. It's something you have to work at. But like the picture here shows, you're trying to persuade people in your family, say, to eat healthier. You don't do this by saying you're junk food junkies, you're blah, 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 and doing all this criticism and name calling and belittling, because that entrenches them more deeply into the things. You say, I'm concerned about the way you're eating because I'm concerned about your health, blah, blah. I know you have the right to eat however you want. I just want you to know I'm concerned. I'm worried that you're going to make yourself sick. I'm worried that you'll have a heart attack. It scares me. Okay, and I wish that you would eat better. There's nothing in that is belittling or controlling to the other person. So when you're trying to create respectful persuasion, you express why you believe that your opinion or something is correct. You listen respectfully and acknowledge the other person's point of view. You explain why you feel that what you're suggesting is in their best interests. This is very, very important. If you cannot explain to your child why what you're trying to get them to do is in their interest, not yours, but in their interest, or your spouse, it's in their interest, or your friend, it's in their interest. If you can't do that, then what you're doing is you're puffing yourself up as, I know what's best for other people, and I'm going to blah, blah, blah to get my way. If you can do that, you're still not, you're still acknowledging their fact to accept or reject what you're saying. But you could say, well, why don't you just try it? Why don't you just try eating healthier for a week and see how you feel? If they're not persuaded, you drop the subject and you honor their right that they are free to make their own choices. And you should also give them the opportunity to persuade you as to why they might be right. Can you think of if we were teaching now this is not a class in this. This is just an overview of this. But let's just say we maybe it's future time I do a class in just this. But let's suppose in society that we were teaching people how to do this. And then so we would have a more civil society, because people would, instead of immediately jumping into the name calling, criticizing, hate, blah, 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 we would be more apt to listen to each other and do this. Now, what that escalates into when we don't is it escalates into anger and violence. In a healthy, loving relationship, expressions of anger have no place. Anger does not have to imply the threat of violent behavior to be abusive. It's unwise to stay in a relationship if someone continually loses their temper, and especially if they're willing to escalate that into violence. Arguments are always power struggles. So when you're arguing with someone, you have been locked in, you're immediately locked into a situation of one of us is going to win, the other one's going to lose. In other words, you're locked into the win-lose, lose-win mindset. It takes two people to argue. I keep trying to explain this to some people in my family. You can't argue with a person who won't argue back. What you learn to do is sidestep the power struggle. You basically, the other person's like trying to fight with you. You listen to them, you acknowledge their point of view, and then you can just say, I don't see it exactly the same way. If they go like blah, blah, and they want to argue, you say, look, I don't want to argue about this. You're entitled to your opinion. It's okay. I'm okay with you having a difference of opinion on me on this. You're basically backing out of the power struggle. You're not trying to force them to accept your way, but you're not going to allow them to force you to accept their way. You're sidestepping it. And you're saying, look, instead, how about, is there another possibility that we could explore that would, both of us could agree on? Are you willing to do that? You invite them to, as Stephen R. Covey says, explore the third alternative. Wayne Dyer puts it this way: do you want to be right, or do you want to be happy? Do you want to have love in your relationships, or you want to be right? Okay. If you want to be right, and you're going to destroy feelings of happiness and love, because being right doesn't make you happy. Win-win doesn't seek my way or your way, it seeks our way, which is, again, what Stephen R. Covey calls the third alternative. I highly recommend reading his book or listening like I do his audiobook about this, because he talks a lot about this, and maybe, again, I'll do a webinar on that later, but it's that the win-win is the third alternative. Now, this gets into a concept that I learned from this one book on marriage called The Two-Choice Dilemma. And the two-choice dilemma is this: we want to be in control of two things in relationships. Okay? One, we want to be free to be ourselves. We want to be able to make our own decisions. And the second one is we want our partner to understand, accept, and support those choices and decisions. We want our partner to like us. Now, if I want the first, if I want to be free to make my own choices and decisions, to be who I am, I have to let go of needing my partner to understand, accept, and support that. If I want my partner to understand, love, and accept my decisions, I have to give up my right to make my own choices. That is the two-choice dilemma. You can't have it both ways. Okay? That's where the conflict comes from, is because I want the approval of others, but I also want to be free. And that particular dynamic is what creates the polishing effect of relationships. Relationships polish us. They force us to have to negotiate. They force us to have to work through problems. They force us to have to make changes to our personality that improve and better us if we allow the process to work. You have to learn good communication and negotiating skills to get out of that and find instead our way, where we are making the decision and we are supportive of each other. So it's a we instead of a you or me. And again, these are skills that we are not taught. Okay, we are not taught this in school. We're not taught this in the way in the media and the music and the social structure. None of this gets taught to us. It's all just things. So Stephen R. Covey calls this win-win philosophy a frame of mind and heart that constantly seeks mutual benefit in all human interactions. In other words, when I look at this and I say, there are things I want, but I'm unwilling to make you lose so I can get what I want. Is there a way we can negotiate so I can get what I want, you can get what you want, we can get what we want, and we're always seeking for solutions that are mutually beneficial, mutually satisfying, where everybody feels good about the decision and everybody is committed to the plan. So like, with my wife and I, we're wanting to move. She doesn't really like the hot climate of St. George, and I'm kind of getting tired of the fact that I can't grow a decent garden here because the summer gets so hot that it like burns everything up unless I pay a fortune in water bills to try to water everything. And so we sat down and we made a list of everything that we both wanted in a place to live and house to live, whatever. And now I'm trying to work with her to set goals, put this into effect, that we're both enthusiastically working towards this change. Now, it was going to take a couple of years to arrange everything to kind of move where we'd want to, but at least we now have a goal. Now, William F. Harley talks about something in marriage called the policy of mutual agreement, which is what he considers the ideal situation of what a couple should agree to in a marriage, which is we will do nothing without the enthusiastic support of our partner. In other words, we give up our right to do whatever we want, and our partner gives up the right to do whatever they want in exchange for us seeking to find what we both can enthusiastically decide to do together, which binds the couple into teamwork rather than a power struggle. I like what Utah Phillips said: agreement is sacred. When we can work towards mutually beneficial agreements, well, what do you want? Get the other person to define what they want. Say, well, this is what I want. Where's the overlap? Okay, where are we disagreeing? Is there something that we could work on that we would both want that would be different? Okay. Stephen R. Covey, in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, says the character that is at the foundation of people who are able to achieve win-win in relationships is, number one, they have to have integrity. They have to keep their commitments. When they agree to something, they have to follow through and be trustworthy. Second is they have to have maturity. Immature people are self-centered people. Mature people want win-win. They want things not just for themselves, but other people around them. So they are going to be courteous, assertive, and caring. And there's also an abundance mentality. If you have a scarcity mentality, if you have a belief that there is a scarcity, for example, of money, then you're going to look at people who have more money than you are, and you're going to be jealous of them because you think that they're getting this money and there's no money for you and blah, blah, blah. But if you have this idea that there's abundance, there's these amazing opportunities, and that means that I could make that kind of money too, then you're no longer caught in the poverty mentality. You're no longer caught in the fact that if someone else wins, it means I've lost. You're caught in the mentality of there's enough out there for everybody to win, for everybody to get valuable, to everybody have a good life, everybody to have happiness. Now, it's important to understand, and this goes back to what we said, you can't define another person's win. You have to figure out what they want. We discussed that in detail last week, but it's just a reminder of that. And also that winning is not logical, it is an emotional. And this is important for men because men tend to approach problems from more logical, mental point of view that, look, like they might say to their wife, I'm providing for you, I'm doing this for you. Okay, but if she doesn't feel like she's winning, okay, even a person so logically getting what they want, it isn't a win if it's not emotionally satisfying. That's very important. So this is the 4 steps to seeking the third alternative in Stephen R. Covey's book. I see myself, which means I understand my own selfishness, I understand my own needs, I understand my own proclivity to be hurtful, blah, blah, blah. And then from that point of view, I start seeing other people around me clearly. I start listening to them. I stop judging them, and I start like really trying to understand them. And then I start seeking them out. I start drawing them out, getting to understand what they want, what they don't want, blah, blah. And then I find ways to synergize, to make it so that we both have the win-win. And again, that's his book. So you can't build this if you don't listen to other people. As Stephen R. Covey says, seek first to understand, then seek to be understood. Because it's easier to negotiate if you first really, really get clear about what the other person wants. And this also is true in just general, that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And then I learned a corollary to that many years ago. Therefore, do all you can to be ready for the call, but wait to be called. So, for example, with kids, okay, and I may see things that I would like to teach these kids, but if I just lecture to them like yak, 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 they're not ready to hear. The student is not ready. But if I kind of, I'm understanding, blah, 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 and wait, there are moments when people are open, when you might be able to put in a thought or an idea and they're open to it and they're ready to hear it. And so you're prepared to respond to the call, but you're waiting for the opportunity. You're waiting for the question. You're waiting for the moment when they're open to hear. And that goes along with this idea that nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Now, those are the major abusive love busters. The other love busters are dishonesty, annoying habits, independent behavior, and I'm going to add one that wasn't in William F. Harley's book, which is lust-based sex. And I'm going to explain that one not this week, but next week. Not next week, but in the next session. Intimacy requires honesty. Now, this is really hard. It's very hard because, we often lie to avoid upsetting the other person or to try to make ourselves look good. But anytime we're not truthful, we're also not being intimate. So it's difficult to be truthful. I find it, I would say I'm more guilty of lies of omission, of just not saying things, than I am lies of commission, just simply because I often feel like the other person doesn't really want to hear what I have to say. But nonetheless, the more I'm not really communicating, the less intimacy we really have. I've always liked this because I believe that the problem is I want emotional honesty from other people. So when other people open up to me and they're communicating with me, I'm happy. Even if they're telling me things that I don't want to hear, even if they're telling me about problems or issues they have with me, I would rather hear it than do that. Now, if I'm going to get upset because they're being honest with me, then they're going to shut down. So I've always liked this passage from Proverbs that open rebuke is better than secret love. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. So I would rather have someone openly rebuke me than pretend to like me, and when they really don't. But radical honesty begins with being honest about yourself and understanding how you feel, your history, and then learning to find ways to communicate who you are to your partner. Many times we shouldn't be honest about negative things we are thinking because they involve disrespectful judgments, angry outbursts, or selfish demands. In other words, being honest doesn't mean, oh, I'm feeling angry with you, so I'm going to lose my temper because that's honest. Okay? That's not. That's just me blowing up at the other person. We temper those things so that we can talk about them with kindness and truth. And this was something that I learned from, what's his name? I can't think of his name right now. But he pointed out this passage, do not let kindness and truth leave you. And I when I read that, I thought, well, I've always been kind, but in trying to be kind, I haven't always been truthful. How do I be kind and truthful? How do I speak the truth with kindness? That's important. If you're going to be truthful, you also should be truthful with kindness, with a soft answer. Now, annoying habits is probably a love buster that more applies to the way women feel about men than it does about the way men feel about women. But it's not as big of a love buster as the stuff we've talked about before, but it's basically repeated habits and thoughts that basically annoy the other person. They may not be wrong, they may not be abusive, they may not be like whatever, but they just get on the other person's nerves. And so you sometimes have to talk about that. I mean, maybe you have a habit of like, I don't know, you could think of things like farting or picking your nose or coming home and plopping on the couch and turning on the TV and drinking a beer or whatever, and with no thought of how that affects your partner. And so sometimes you have to talk about those things and work them out. Independent behavior is a family issue in marriage, which means that you do what you want without thinking about how it affects your spouse and children. And again, you have to, find creative ways to make things like a win-win so that you're not causing loss there. Now, in the next session, I'm going to get into this other one. I'm going to talk about a book I read, which was a fantastic book called Cupid's Poison Arrows. And it's about how lust-driven sex actually creates conflict in relationships. And I'm going to explain what I mean by lust-driven sex and then why that actually creates a biochemistry that leads towards conflict in relationships, and how you create a love-based intimacy that actually creates feelings of warmth and bonding with you. This was really, really helpful to me because it really, really does work. So I haven't seen anybody typing any questions. So before I do this, I just want to say, if you like these programs, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the videos on YouTube. The more likes you get, the more the algorithms push the videos to the forefront. And also, please, if you enjoy these programs, share them on social media. If you are watching this on YouTube, the URL to attend the live events is here on the screen and is also in the comments below. Also, we can use your financial support to be able to stay, so I can keep having the money to support myself and my family and keep doing this. And if you want to help us that way, please visit stephenhorn.com. At least sign up for our mailing list so that you can get announcements about programs we have or materials that we have for sale. Or if you really want to support us, it's $19.95 a month to join our member program. You save money if you join for 6 months or 12 months. And that really helps us keep going. It gives us some steady income. And we have 2 webinars that are for members only. We also have, and some of these that I'm actually doing here are based on programs I did before for my members that are online and archived and even have PowerPoints and everything. And you also get discounts on our other products and courses. And you can, check out our store and look at some of the materials we have for sale. So appreciate all those of you who do support us and help us. I like said, this Love Buster thing is really, really important, because if you really are honest with yourself, okay, you'll see that you engage in love busters. You may think you don't, but I don't know anybody who's that nice. I mean, if nothing else, you're engaging in love busters in your head, because you're sitting there and maybe you're the self-sacrificing, sweet, trying to be helpful partner, not getting what you want. And in your mind, you're thinking, this selfish person over here, I'm giving to them and they're not giving back to me, and blah, 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 blah. In other words, that's a disrespectful judgment. Okay. And all of these things are not healthy relationships. I really like something I read in this one little book that really helped me understand this concept of what relationships are all about. It was basically this thing like God saying, okay, you think you're with this selfish spouse and they're not on your level, and you think you'd be better off with another spouse. And he says, but who put you with this spouse? How did you wind up with this person? Do you know who put you in the place where you met them? Who guided you? He says, it's basically, I'm behind everything. Okay. And you're with this spouse because if you were with a spouse who just agreed with you all the time and did whatever, you wouldn't grow. You wouldn't learn what I learned. You'd become egotistical, self-centered, self-righteous. But by putting you with this spouse who has these different opinions than you and grates against you, I'm forcing you to learn to be unconditionally loving. I'm molding you. I'm shaping you. I'm blah, blah, blah. Now, it's not to say that sometimes relationships don't end. I mean, that happens. But I just read that and I realized, we're attracted to people because they possess characteristics that we don't, and we possess characteristics they don't. And the crucible is a crucible for growth. And what makes that a growing experience rather than a experience that escalates into conflict until it breaks up is developing the philosophy of mutual respect, win-win, learning to make deposits and ask for deposits, learning to avoid love busters and stand up for yourself when someone else is doing love busters to you, and working so that you both become better people in the process. And that concept has really helped me in viewing marriage differently than this cultural idea of we find the perfect person for us and they fulfill our needs and we live happily ever after. Well, that's not what marriage is really all about. Marriage is putting us into a situation where we're forced to grow and learn and develop the skills that we need to develop to be better people. And when you see it from that point of view, and you see that the things that annoy you about your spouse and the things that frustrate you about the relationship are all pointing to the things where you need to learn better skills. You need to learn to develop yourself. And you take that responsibility that you're then going to look for better alternatives, better solutions, better ways of communicating, better ways of dealing with more relationship skills. It becomes a crucible for growth. And I'll tell you a little secret. Once I learned this, what I found is that when I started approaching relationships this way, I would grow and then the other person would want to get out of the relationship because they didn't want to grow with me. And because they didn't want to grow with me, when I grew, it changed the dynamics of the relationship so that it was no longer, because there's always, when there's dysfunction in a relationship, it's mutual. Your dysfunction attracted their dysfunction, and they're grading against each other's dysfunction. We're just trying to force you to grow. Well, if you grow, the other person has a choice to either grow with you, okay, or they're going to go, wait a minute, this isn't the game I signed up for, and they leave. And so they leave, not you, because you're no longer playing the game. Like if you were playing the I'm the generous, giving, loving person, and you're the self-centered, blah, blah, blah person, and you suddenly grow up and recognize your own need and capacity for self-centered behavior, and you start asserting yourself in that relationship, and you start in a positive way asserting yourself, the other person is either going to respond and grow and learn to be more respectful of your needs or wishes, or they're going to say, well, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this. I just signed up for you to be a doormat and do whatever I want, blah, 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 blah. I don't want to be here anymore. And so always it is growing is going to make us better people. And if we grow, then even if the other person leaves us, now we're operating at a higher level and we're going to attract someone else who's operating at a higher level. That's what I started to understand. And at that, the higher the level you operate on, the higher the level of the game you're going to play, because you're going to get people who are operating on that higher level. And so by growing, you're moving into a better situation, whether the other person chooses to grow with you or doesn't choose to grow with you. So thanks for watching. Didn't see any questions. Thanks to all of you who attended today. And I will get this posted and wish you all the best. Just this stuff takes practice. This is the knowledge. The way you utilize knowledge is you start seeing what aspect of this could I start putting into practice? How could I, going back to the learning and teaching module I did earlier, how can I expand on this and make it part of me? And as I make it part of me, I acquire skill. And when I acquire skill, I eventually become the teacher, and I'm able to transmit that knowledge to other people. And that's the model of learning that I started this whole presentation out with. So if you follow that model of learning, if you take and you see something that like really spoke to you, and you expand on it and seek to put it into practice and find how to actually master that skill, then you will grow and it will become a part of you and a permanent part of you. If you just say, oh, I heard it, I know it, blah, 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 you haven't really learned it because you haven't, applied it and put it into practice. So be sure to, seek to put things into practice, not just listen to them or hear them. Thanks again, and best wishes to everyone.